young startup companies like ours, we were willing to be exhausted all the time. 16-hour days sometimes was just like the norm for weeks at a time. But when you're doing 12, 15, 16 hours a day and then you can't get the work done, that's when you bring on somebody else. And then you continue to do 12, 15-hour days, but now you can get more done. And so, for the first 10 years, we just work like dogs.
That is Dan Kennison this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey friends, how's it going? Welcome to another episode here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. First off, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who is sharing their thoughts, feelings, comments, concerns, etc., in regards to the podcast, both in review form on Apple Podcasts and also sending me a message and letting me know what your thoughts are. I really appreciate the feedback. It helps me make this show better, and it helps me then in turn book some of the great guests like we have on the podcast today. Today, my guest is Dan Kennison, and Dan is the owner of Premier Tactical. You may have seen some of their bikes floating around at some of the different triathlon races. You may have seen some of the pictures floating around on social media. And Dan is the owner and the creator of Premier Tactical. And Dan actually came from a background in medical devices, and when he built and sold his company, it was then his idea to start building a bike that could compete with some of these higher end bikes, but was a direct-to-consumer model so that he could drive the cost down but keep the quality up really, really high. So that is what Dan is doing with Premier Tactical. And it's a very cool story to hear how he went from, being in the medical device industry for Premier Medical, which was one of his first companies that he started, and then kind of shifting his focus once retiring into this new company after he had found his passion for triathlon. And the other thing that I thought was very, very interesting was, if you remember back to the episode where I had Josh Sprague on, and he was the creator of the hydration pack, Orange Mud, Josh said that his experience and everything that he had in the medical device industry that he came from, he didn't transfer any of that, like none of his contacts, nothing, any of that, none of the manufacturing, none of that helped him. So listen in here and see if you can, see some of the differences in Dan's story and how his contacts and everything actually may have helped him a little bit. But without further ado, I bring you this week's interview with Dan Kennison. So this evening, I am very excited to bring this guest to you. His name is Dan, and Dan is the owner of Premier Tactical, which is a bike company who is kind of shaking up the cycling industry as far as everything goes in the triathlon world, because Dan is producing a bike that is competing with some of these very high-end bikes that you may well know, but he's producing it at a much more affordable price point for the consumer. So I would like to say, just first off, Dan, thank you so much for jumping on here with me and being such an open book, as you said, and being willing to share your story with me about building Premier Tactical.
Well, thanks, Ian. I really look forward to talking to you this evening.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be fun, and as I said when we talked on the phone prior to this, there's definitely some parallels, and it's very interesting because you are one of the entrepreneurs who I am interviewing for this show, but oddly enough, you are one of three who came from the medical device and medical backgrounds, and then went on to launch a company kind of in this health wellness triathlon space. So I think it's going to be very interesting to hear your side of how this journey all began.
That sounds great. Actually, it's interesting because when I look back, each segment of my career has actually been very, very different. But as you get older, you start to take parts and pieces of the education and the knowledge that you've learned and build on that. And I think that nowadays, people do a lot of different jobs in their lifetime, and it's actually a real benefit to come from different industries and then to use those best practices and keep accumulating knowledge along the way.
So let's talk about where you first started accumulating some knowledge and, this point in time kind of prior to launching Premier Medical, which was that your first company?
It was my first company that I owned myself. So prior to that, out of high school, I went into the Air Force, and I was lucky enough to get a job in air traffic control. And I really, really loved that job. It taught you how to think spatially. It was exciting. And I did that from 1976 up to 1980. And I don't know if you remember, but back then, Ronald Reagan was the president, and PATCO, the Air Traffic Controllers Union nationwide, went on strike. And I had just gotten out of the Air Force and had put my application in up in New York only because it was very hard to get a job with the FAA at that time. And then all of a sudden, every job was open. So I tried to reapply in Texas, and there was a fight over my application. And then in the meantime, I went to work for Northrop Aircraft Corporation while they were trying to get that sorted out, and ended up staying with Northrop for about 3 years. So my early career was more into aviation and aerodynamics. But you never know where things are going to lead.
Well, and an early career in aerodynamics is, I'm sure, now becoming very beneficial when it comes to designing the aerodynamics for a triathlon bike, which is one of the top things that everybody's looking for.
Yeah, it's all kinds of things like that. After it was interesting, the guys at PATCO actually bid against Northrop, and Northrop lost the flight simulator contract that we had. So I was looking for a job, and a guy that I was renting a house from at the time, I was pretty young back then, and he was the CFO at Lubbock General Hospital in Texas. And I told him, I was looking for something and didn't know what I wanted to do. And he said, well, why don't you come in and sort out the hospital storeroom and our purchasing department and see if you can't make some improvements in that while you're trying to figure out what you wanted to do. And, sure enough, a gap in employment led me into the medical business. And I did really well there, went to work for a company after that sold medical products. And I moved up from just a sales guy to a sales manager regionally. And then I ended up having about 100 salesmen in the central United States for a big company out of Chicago. And so that got me really into the medical products career. And I stayed in that for quite a long time. And the company, when I got to the corporate headquarters, I found out that they were kind of a mean company to their employees. Not me specifically, because I was high enough up, but it was hard to be as ruthless with our salespeople and some of the staff that they wanted us to be. And so in March of 1989, I took a $30,000 bonus check and I quit. And I started Premier Medical, and in essence, went to work competing against my former company, which was a $1 billion company at the time.
And so talk to me a little bit about that, because I would think that, most people who are high up in a company like that, they probably have at least some sort of financial planner or somebody who's helping them out with their money. They probably have, a pretty good solid foundation of investments and everything like that. So what made you kind of take the gamble, so to speak, and go out and try and compete with this company who's $1 billion company, instead of taking the safe route and investing that $30,000 bonus, and essentially putting it away, but playing it safe, and keeping that somewhere, for something later on down the road, retirement, or something like that.
Yeah, it was a combination of things for me. One, I was probably young and a little bit stupid, but aside from that, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was, at the time, if you remember the AIDS crisis, latex gloves and vinyl gloves were in high demand. Prices were going through the roof, and I had a salesman working under me in Houston, Texas, and he went to MD Anderson Hospital, I think it was MD Anderson, and he sold them a container of gloves because they were tired of being short and risking being out of gloves. And I remember flying down there because the commission structure meant that he was going to make about $13,000 off that sale. And it was at the time, gloves were up at $250 a case, so it was just a crazy time. And I went down there and took him and his wife out to dinner. They talked to me about what they were going to do with the money. And when I got back to the corporate headquarters and I talked to the vice president of the company, I told him about my conversation, and he said, "We're not paying him that money. He's going to get a regular commission off this, like any other product. He's not going to get a windfall." I said, "Well, we got a windfall. We're selling these gloves at $250 a case when 6 months ago they were $100 a case." And he said, "I don't care. And if he doesn't like it, fire him." And less than 2 weeks later, I had taken that bonus check and quit.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that, in a situation like that, it would be very hard to stick around when, as you just said, the margins, the prices, and what's coming in, and then you also know where it's going. And this guy's out there making the sales and doing the work, and, he's kind of not getting any benefits or any rewards for it. He's just getting what he would normally get. And this was a very significant sale.
Yeah, and these are young salesmen that are at the time were making 25, 30,000 a year, wife and kids. It was I was unable to continue working for a company like that. So I didn't really have any prospects. It came up quick, and I just decided I'd start my own medical company and try to act as a distributor to some of the local hospitals in the Chicagoland area.
Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit and talk to me about what it was like to then start this. I mean, I'm sure you weren't necessarily starting from ground zero, because you had a little bit of knowledge that you had built up from being with your previous company. But how many employees did you start with? Was it just you at the time, and you were kind of a one-man show? You were the one making the sales calls. You were going out. You were doing the orders. You were doing everything.
Yeah, I asked two of the salespeople that I really liked a lot if they wanted to leave and come with me. So it was a big gamble for them as well. But I had been working with them for about a year as the director of corporate accounts, so they knew me pretty well. And so the first thing we had to do was go to court and get a declaratory judgment for non-compete, because the bigger company tried to say we couldn't compete against them. So we won that pretty quick, and then we set up a small office. I think it was 1,200 square feet. It was the three of us. We would hold a big board meeting and decide if we were going to spend $350 on a pallet jack. It was small. We were trying to figure out what products we would sell, and we would then try to set up lines of products with companies that provided those products. And we were pretty successful doing that. We were selling gloves, latex gloves, all the non-woven lines like bouffants, shoe covers, push-button aluminum crutches, and then all the textile lines, patient gowns, hospital sheets, that kind of thing.
And so what I really want to get into kind of deep, and it may seem like we're fast forwarding through the story a little bit. I don't want to, discount anything that kind of happened in those early days, but I would really like to hear about scaling this company and then building a staff underneath of you. Because when you first started out, as you said, it was you and a couple salespeople, but you ended up scaling this business to become very successful. And so I want to hear about that and kind of hear how you went about doing that.
Yeah, it's a series of problems that you solve that that build a business, and it's um, it's also not being afraid, to take some chances. The first big thing that happened after we got our line set up is I remember the rep that we were buying our gloves from said that the distributor or the manufacturer, supposed manufacturer, was coming in from New York and wanted to have a dinner with us. So we're sitting at the table, and at the time we were doing 300 or 400 cases a month, and of this particular product. And the gentleman from New York looked at me kind of funny and asked me for my business card. And we had our dinner. On the way back, we left, and I said, "What can I help you with?" He says, "Well, in all of Illinois, all I sell is 300 or 400 cases. So I thought I was just meeting one of his customers, but you're actually the customer." And so it was a kind of an eye opener for us that because we had always thought we were just another customer for this rep. So I talked to the rep and said, "Hey, we'd like to expand this line. I want to work directly with this gentleman." And so we came to an agreement, and we started then bringing in 40-foot containers, 2,200 cases at a time. And we built that up to 3 or 4 containers a month of product. And we were still, at that time, we were kind of in that 1,200 square foot building. So I decided to move, and a guy that I knew had a building that we could move into that was about 6,000 square feet. So we did that. We had a part-time bookkeeper. I brought her on full-time. And we all kind of did everything. I'd have a suit on making sales calls, and so would the other 2 guys. And then we'd come back and we'd print up all the invoices, and we'd take the seats out of the vans and load it up with product and bring them to the hospital, and then do it again the next day. And so it was a lean operation. And it was fun. We were young, we were working hard, unloading containers, and didn't even have a dock at that time. We were handing them off to each other off the containers when they came in. But all of a sudden, this guy could not supply us with the gloves, and we were selling to all the big hospitals in Illinois or in Chicagoland. So again, a problem. So I called him up. His name was Prim Bandari, a Malaysian guy. And I said, "What is going on?" He says, "Hey, I can get you some gloves. They'll be about 4 months late, but I'm going to have to change the name." So red flags went off. And I told my partners, I said, "Something's not right. I'm going to buy a ticket. I'm going to go to Malaysia." We had the name of the factory with the address on the side of the box. And I said, "I'm going to go talk to the factory. Something's up." So, again, out of a problem, out of some issue, I went over there and got in a taxi and actually showed him the side of a case of gloves that he brought me to the address. And the owners of the real owners of the factory were there. And this guy had pulled the business from them over a couple of pennies a case. So they had lost the business. And I said, "Hey, I'm sitting here with a couple letters of credit. Would you guys sell me gloves?" And they said, "Absolutely." And so that then really made us direct, really increased the profit margin. And we grew the business then over the next 9 years from zero to about $30 million. By going direct in China for the nonwovens and vinyl and push-button aluminum crutches. We were getting some of the vinyl gloves out of Taiwan. The latex was coming out of first Malaysia, then Thailand. And all the sheets, towels, pillowcases, and all that stuff were coming from various places through a distributor out in California that we were working with.
So the first question about that I wanted to ask you was, you said you were running a very lean operation. And so talk to me about the decision process when you're running a lean operation and you want to be able to continue to invest back into the company so that you continue to grow it, but you also know that you need to bring somebody else on. You need to bring on somebody else who can deliver the gloves and the supplies to these hospitals while you yourself can then go out and make more sales calls. Or, something of that nature, what does that process look like in your head? Because you know that if you bring that person on, you're now going to have to start giving that person a salary, but how much are they then going to be able to bring back to the company because it's freeing up your time, it's maybe freeing up somebody else's time?
Yeah, that's always the calculation. So, we would bring them on people on part time first. The process to decide is really easy. Young startup companies like ours, we were willing to be exhausted all the time. 16-hour days sometimes was just like the norm for weeks at a time. But when you're doing 12, 15, 16 hours a day and then you can't get the work done, that's when you bring on somebody else. And then you continue to do 12, 15-hour days, but now you can get more done. And so, for the first 10 years, we just worked like dogs. And unfortunately, I had to spend a lot of time overseas because then I was sourcing all the product, handling the forex of the currencies. We were dealing with banking. Most foreign companies will not give you trade credit. So you've got to have about $2.85 in flow for every dollar of sales that you've got, because you got a container, an LC issued, you got one on the water, you got one in inventory, and you're waiting to get paid 30 days. So it's a very difficult process to do international sourcing and manufacturing if you don't have the money. So that was another big issue, was how do you get the money to fund the growth when the banks won't lend on inventory on the water?
And so the other question that I wanted to ask you about when you started scaling was building relationships with your vendors. And, as you were just saying with the money, keeping all of your accounts up to date, making sure that all these accounts are paid on time, making sure you're within good standing with these, suppliers. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So I had another problem. I had I got a fortunate situation happen. I don't know if you remember, but back years ago, PepsiCo owned Kentucky Fried Chicken, Frito-Lay, and Pizza Hut. And so we got a contract that was almost as big as the company to supply all their business. And in the same 30-day period, I got a huge contract with Columbia HCA to supply gloves to all their hospitals. That was the largest hospital chain in the U.S., about 400 hospitals. So I flew back over to Thailand, and I was talking with our glove partner, and I said, first of all, they don't like to give one person a lot of production. They're a little nervous about spreading their production volume across a large customer base because they don't want somebody to pull out on them. So I said, look, I need 20 million gloves a month, which was about 10 containers at the time. And I showed him the purchase order from Columbia. And we played golf for a couple days, had some dinners where we're mulling it over, going back and forth. I'm hoping he's going to say yes. And so one evening he said, okay, I'll give you the production you need. So I was happy for about an hour and a half. And then he got me the next morning and he said, you don't look very happy. What's up? I said, I need to find a way to pay for this now because, the bank is not going to lend on all this inventory. And, this is going to go from like 3 million in sales to 13 million in sales. And so we played golf that afternoon. And by the time we were done playing golf, he looked at me and he said, how many days do you really need to get paid? And I said, 85 days. And he said, would you promise to pay me on the 85th day if I ship you the gloves? And I didn't really understand the question, to be honest with you. I was so consumed with how I was going to try to put a private placement memorandum together or to convince the banks when I got home. And I said, you mean like if I don't pay you for the gloves and you give me the gloves? And he said, yeah, that's what I mean. And I said, his name's Dr. Lee. They got a real long name, but we call him Dr. Lee. I said, I'll tell you what, Dr. Lee, if you do that, you're going to do something for our company that I just don't know any other way to do. And I'll promise you that I'll pay you on the 85th day for every dollar that I owe you. And he shook my hand, and that's really what made our company. It gave us the trade credit that it was just not given to anybody. And that was the beginning, of really big leaps of product and of gain and size and scale. And so, again, a problem arose and solved the problem, and good things happen.
And I can almost guarantee that as sure as you and I are both sitting here, that you paid Dr. Lee on the 85th day.
You got that right. I paid him on the 85th day. And not only did I do that, but then, I talked about that relationship with our vinyl manufacturer in Taiwan, who also had a factory in Shanghai. And we got to where we were doing total about 50 containers a month of various product. And I started getting, some trade credit here and there with our push button aluminum crush vendor, a little bit with our vinyl vendor. And so, but I wasn't afraid to ask then, and I had an example of payment, and so it just kind of worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I was going to say was that, because you built this relationship, and you kind of already touched on it, but because you built this relationship with Dr. Lee, you could then turn around and one, you had the confidence to ask your other suppliers for it, but then you also had the proof that, hey, this person is doing this for us, and if you can do the same, it's going to start bringing in more business for you, and you could kind of lay it out for them so that you had, hard evidence that it was going to work.
That's exactly right. And to be honest, this was a tough one for Dr. Lee too, because at the time I think they had 6 or 8 lines. They're like 100-meter lines with, glove formers going on, all the time. And this new, volume for him meant expansion for him. And so he added 4 lines in one tranche and another 2 lines in another tranche. And so, it was good for him, but it was a risk on his side too.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's just one of those things where, sometimes you have to kind of take that risk. Like you were saying, the risk of hiring, somebody part-time, you have to take that risk to kind of see some of the rewards, so to speak.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's just so interesting. And the whole time you're doing this, you're working hard, you're thinking. But one thing I will say to you that I think kind of leads the way, and I still do that today with the bike business, is that it didn't matter what the issue was with the customer, whether they forgot to order and they needed something sent overnight, or, they said that they couldn't pay for something for an extra few days or whatever. We always did whatever we had to do to keep the customer happy. And if we had to cover for their mistake, we'd cover for their mistake. And doing that over years, it does pay off. It's hard to do it when you're a young company. Somebody, they broke something and it wasn't your problem or whatever. It's hard to make good on their behalf when you know that they're not right. But you know what? If you just do it and suck it up and continue to give good customer service, over time, it does pay off. And all those customers stuck with us through thick and thin for so many years. And I think it was because they saw us in our suits, and then they saw us take off our suits and unload the gloves. They knew we were working hard and being honest with them.
And I think that's huge. I think that's really, really huge. And I didn't even mention this in the beginning, but I was, I guess, air quotes, introduced to you because we both mutually support a brand, Delmo Sports. And something that I say all the time about Delmo Sports, and I think the reason that Delmo Sports is what it is because of Steven. And if you do a Delmo Sports race, when you are doing the race, you will see Steven standing on the dock before you get in the swim. You'll walk right past him, and odds are he'll give you a high five as you're walking down the dock to jump in for the swim. And then you'll see him, somewhere on the bike course. And then when you get out onto the run course, you'll see him riding his fat tire bike around. And so the same as, you were in your suit probably unloading gloves at a hospital, you see Steven out riding his fat tire bike. And I think that kind of person, that kind of personality, and that kind of drive, that is what makes companies successful.
Yeah, I agree. And Steve is a great guy. He puts on some really great venues and races. And he is that kind of a guy. And I think that kind of a spirit where you're never too good to do anything that, I didn't grow up with a lot. Obviously, I couldn't go to college when I first graduated high school until I had earned some money. So, sweeping the floors and emptying the trash cans, it's not beneath anybody. And unloading a container right next to the guys that do it every day when they're behind, or putting your suit on and going and talking to a CEO, you just can't be afraid to do anything, and just be honest. And if you don't know something, say you don't know. And when you do, stand your ground and, let people know you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually, the one thing I was just going to say about that too is that I would be willing to bet that you never asked somebody at your company, no matter what company it was, you never asked somebody to do something that you hadn't done yourself at one point in time.
Yeah, 100%. Or I just sit there and do it with them. Well, it needs to get done. It just has to get done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So now, I want to fast forward a little bit more, because you had mentioned that, you grew over the course of about 9 years, you grew Premier Medical into about $30 million in sales. So when did this point in time come that you started to think about stepping away from this company?
So it was a combination of some things. One of the problems you have with building a company and working hard like that and traveling all overseas, I had 3 kids that were, 2 of which were in high school, right before I sold the company, and actually had worked for the company in the summers and all that kind of stuff. And they, at the time, were not really interested in being a part of it later. They all had their own aspirations, want to make their own way in life. And so I started thinking, I don't want to work 16 hours a day for my youngest son. He was, at the time, he was a little bit younger than them, so he was still coming through school. And I didn't have a succession plan in place. And because we were so vertically integrated with these vendors, these vendors were so good to me and we were so good to them. I had the same 5 vendors for all 10 years. We didn't switch the business. There was no reason to. We just worked through pricing and issues and volumes. So I had 5 companies that provided us with 5 categories that wanted to get vertical in the U.S. They had talked to me about coming into the U.S. under a different brand name and, in essence, being a competitor to us, but they didn't really want to do that and try to set up a sales force and try to set up a distribution, all that kind of thing. So the timing was just right, and I just went to each one of them and said, hey, would you like to buy a portion of the business? And so I basically sold them their own, sales. Now they just had a direct relationship and higher margins. And I got out of the rat race of wearing myself down, and got to spend time with my family, and those guys were all happy, and that's why we did it.
So I'm not sure if you've read it or not, but have you read the book, Ray Dalio's book that just came out probably around Christmas this past year?
I have not.
Principles. So he talks a lot about, putting the people in place, because what he did was it was getting to the same point for him. And he was ready to kind of step away from his company and kind of start this next chapter in his life. And he started to put people in place to kind of take things over, so that he didn't make like this grand exit, and he kind of just gradually stepped away. So is that something that you did?
No, I wasn't that far-sighted. We had managers, bookkeepers, warehouse supervisors and staff and all that. And I had also opened up a small factory here, not a small factory, it's a pretty good sized factory. We had gotten a contract with the Veterans Administration, but the only way we could get it and comply with the Trade Agreements Act and the Buy America Act was to produce a large portion of the product here in the U.S. So I opened up a glove factory right here in Joliet and hired a bunch of employees. So we had about 60 employees in the glove factory, plus the warehouse and then the administrative staff. So, at that point, going overseas so much, the company could run on its own when I was gone. I'd go for sometimes 10 days at a time, but I was doing that a lot. So, we had really high quality people that had been with the company since I started it. And so it wasn't that big of a stretch for me because at that time, my prime role was keeping the relationships with the vendors intact and doing the banking and kind of going to high level meetings. And, the new owners can do those things. So, so maybe I should have been a little more thoughtful in the planning, but it worked out okay.
And did you feel torn at all? I mean, I know that you were traveling for business, but still getting to travel is getting to travel. And, I'm sure that this business was such a huge portion of your life. It lasted 10 years. So at any point in time, did you feel torn or like this maybe wasn't the right decision to walk away?
No, I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Anybody who says that they don't like being retired or able to not, have their brain in the vice, I think they're kidding themselves. I didn't miss it. I really didn't miss it. I was enjoying myself. That's a buddy of mine. I was doing triathlons at the time. And so late in life, I think I was 42 when I did my first triathlon. And it was around this time when I could then start working out and taking care of myself. And before that, I was kind of a couch potato type of person.
And so this is, when triathlon started to kind of come on to your radar a little bit. And were you as enamored with the bikes as, kind of everyone is? I feel like, running is just running. All you need is a pair of sneakers, really, and that's it. You could get by, maybe you have a hat and some glasses. But, it's the equipment for running is just, like I said, it's just a pair of running shoes. And then as far as the swim goes, it's pretty much the same thing. You got a pair of goggles, they give you a swim cap at the race and, you might need a bathing suit. So the bike is like really where all the equipment is. So did you really kind of gravitate towards the bike and become super enamored with that right from the start?
I did. And the last few years I had the company when the kids were still around, I was racing at the time for fun, Formula Atlantic cars, the open wheel racing series, amateur type series. And so I was really into the aerodynamics and into friction reduction, into rubber compounds. I mean, we were racing all over the place. And so when the kids, we'd leave on a Friday and get back on a Sunday almost every weekend in the summer up here. So when the kids went away to college, it wasn't as fun just going, my wife and I, we kind of missed the kids. So I sold the race car, all the stuff. So when I started doing triathlon, then the bikes became my race car. I would tinker with it. And my first bike was a Cervelo P3C triathlon bike. I had never owned a road bike. And I just loved it. I thought it was a beautiful piece of machinery. They did a wonderful job. I loved that bike and I loved the company. So, I think I'm with you. The bike and the gear kind of drew me in a little bit.
And were you always a tinkerer? Like, were you always the person who had to figure out like how the rear derailleur worked? And, you're always tinkering with all the cables and the brakes and, just trying to figure things out?
I was more like, I had a little company within our company, which was a friction reduction company where we could take metal parts and render the surfaces very, very flat. And so I was thinking more like, how can I apply what I've done in the past with this bike to make it faster? How can I tire compounds or can I get the friction out of the chain or can I do something aerodynamically with the way the bar and the fork is set up? So that was really what I was thinking about all the time. And and at the time, my wife was an attorney, and so our intention was to kind of retire, do some triathlon. She was doing some sprints. I was doing some Olympics and some halves, and kind of retire. And about 7 years ago, she got offered a judgeship here in Will County. And so our thoughts of moving back down to Texas and retiring were kind of then not going to happen. And that's really when I started thinking, okay, I either need to, the kids are gone, I don't have the company, I can't keep working out 4 or 5 hours a day. What am I, I got to do something other than the laundry and the dishes. So I really started thinking about the bike seriously then. And my bike was about 5 years old or so, and I wanted a new bike. And the geometries of almost all the triathlon bikes had changed from a long, low, aggressive bike geometry that I really liked to kind of a shorter, taller bike geometry. And I couldn't get comfortable on any of the new bikes. And my wife came in one day and saw me with a napkin, and I got on my CAD computer and I started doing some things. And she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to build a bike." And she said, "Do you mean like a custom bike?" I said, "No, I'm going to build a bike company, and we're going to fill a niche in the market that the industry has turned away from, which is the kind of the higher end age group athletes that still want that long, low geometry."
And so when it comes to the bike and the cycling industry, for one, is very, very competitive, and it's a very hard market to get into. And two, at least to the best of my knowledge, I mean, I haven't worked at a bike shop or anything, but when you walk into a bike shop, you can clearly see that it's pretty much controlled by some of these really big brands, So like you said, you had a Cervelo. I mean, Cervelo really has a big piece of the market, and then there's some of these other bikes, the Cannondales, and then you start getting into the real high ends with the Pinarellos and everything. So what gave you kind of, I guess, the gumption, I guess would be the right word, to think that you would be able to, enter this difficult market?
Well, I don't think without the past businesses and experience I could have done it. I don't think, without that, I think it'd be very difficult to do, because the big companies over there, they don't want to talk to somebody who's going to start off small. They're taking huge orders from these big companies and all that kind of thing. But I actually called our partner in the vinyl business in Taiwan, and they're the largest producer of vinyl products around the world. And I knew the father who has passed and the son. So I called Andy up. I said, "Andy, I want to come over, and I'm going to bring one of my old engineers who was a Taiwanese. He lives out in California with me. And I want to meet the best bicycle manufacturers. And would you do introductions for me to make that possible?" And so he said, "Sure." I mean, we were really good friends for a long time. So I had a couple of dinners, and Andy just said, "Hey, this is Dan. He pays his bills and does what he says. And this is, bike manufacturer X, Y, and Z. They're the best in the business, and you guys should work together." And because of Andy's position, that carried a lot of weight. And so then I started visiting factories and really looking at, how we would do it and the features I wanted to do. And one of the myths in the bike business is that what you really have are a lot of marketing companies. And you have some design companies, but the continuum of innovation and best practices really lie with the bike companies in Taiwan. They're making for everybody. They see what everybody's come up with. They'll come to you and say, "Hey, we found a new way to do this. You should try that." So I didn't have any of the legacy systems. I could go straight to best practices, the very best machinery, the very best materials, without 5-year-old molds or without maybe having engineers that were used to doing something for 20 years. And so by God, that's the way they're going to do it. And so we really had a leg up, starting from a blank sheet of paper.
But you also had a leg up because of the relationships that you built and, having this contact in Andy. Because without that, as you said, you wouldn't have been able to start this because you wouldn't have been able to get in contact with these bike manufacturers.
Yeah. And that's the reason why you got to treat people right and do what you say all through your career. You just never know, 10 years later, where you might be going or what you might be doing. And so, just be an honest broker in everything you do and do what you say. And, I think as you get older, opportunities arise. I can pass on a lot more things now than I could when I was 30 and was scratching out a living. So, and it's easier to be good when you've done okay, because you're not trying to, look for every nickel under every rock,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so what did you transfer from, when you were working in the, aerodynamics industry, and then we've already kind of touched on some of the things that you transferred from when you were at Premier Medical and building those relationships, but kind of bring it full circle for me and talk to me about some of the things that you picked up along the way that you're now using for Premier Tactical.
So the most important thing that I wanted to do, I thought the pricing for bikes was getting out of hand, and I didn't think there was the niche geometry that I thought was out there. So I wanted to build the very best bike that you can buy, and I wanted to sell it for half the price of my competitor. Those were my goals. And so if Trek or Specialized came out with the tactical bike, it would be a $12,000 bike. It just would be. I mean, our bike comes with so much more than their bike. I mean, a stock tactical bike is the fastest bike right now, other than the P5X in the wind tunnel and on the road, unless you buy all the ceramic speed stuff. That's the only way you can beat it. So it's the fastest bike out there. It comes with electronic Di2 shifting. It comes with optimized chain, all the ceramics and all the bearings. It comes with the hard travel case that I custom made so that you don't have to, go crazy in a hotel room at 10 o'clock at night trying to put your bike together. We have our sponsored athlete program that every customer is in. It comes with a disc. It comes with the 88 millimeter front. It comes with Continental GP 4000 race tires. And, if you do all those things with another brand, they have to charge you $12,000 because they're sponsoring Tour de France teams and they've got huge marketing departments and a bunch of lawyers. And I'm not sponsoring those kind of people. And we're treating people right, so I don't need a team of lawyers. And we 100% own every mold and work directly with the factory, so there's no middlemen between what we're doing and what the athlete receives.
And so when an athlete receives the bike, do they receive it directly from the manufacturer?
No, all the bikes come to us, and they're about 95% pre-assembled. Then our bikes also come with a Pioneer power meter. So I take the left side crank arm off, I send it out to California, and I get that back. So we'll reinstall that. We put the sensor monitor on there. Then I put on our optimized chain. The bikes come in without chains because I don't want to sell our customers that Shimano chain. I want them to have a super, super efficient chain. And then what we do is, because we sell direct, I get on with the customer and we go through a series of measurements. And then I set up the bike to fit them. And then we ship the bike to them directly. And they're going to be about 95% right in that fit. And then we pay a local fitter of their choice. If they don't have one, we'll recommend one, $200 to do a dial-in fit so that then they can get that last little bit of fit in. So to me, it's if you don't have that extra bit of fit, service, and allowance, it'd be pretty hard to buy a bike direct from a direct seller. But that's a problem we knew we had to solve, and that's how we solved it.
And I mean, your price point is coming in well below some of these high-end bikes. And no offense to Cervelo, because I love the Cervelo P5 and I love the way that the Cervelo P5 looks, but the new super bike, air quotes, I guess that's what they're calling it, the new super bike that they came out with, the P56, I'm sorry, but I can't get on board with that thing.
Well, I think Cervelo is an awesome company. I like the P56. I like the P5X. I like all the bikes. So it's not that, and we know, I don't know if you know or not, but a bunch of guys from on the Slow Twitch forum kind of got tired of hearing the marketing data about who has the fastest bike and all that. So about a year ago, they crowdfunded, I think, $7,000, and they invited myself, Cervelo, Cannondale, Ventum, and one or two other bikes, can't remember which. And they brought them all to the A2 wind tunnel. All of the manufacturers had a representative there, so we made sure all the bikes were set up exactly to the millimeter the same. And they did both rider on and rider off testing to see whose was fastest. And the Cervelo P5X in the wind tunnel beat us by 2.5 to 3 watts. 2.5 to 3 watts. And that bike is 3 times the price. Mm-hmm. And the Cervelo P5X beat us by 2 watts, and we beat everybody else. But our optimized chain is good for 5 watts. So a hard chain on the road is faster than all those bikes is, unless you buy my optimized chain and put it on a Cervelo P5X. So they published that data on Slow Twitch, and everybody was shocked because the consensus was, Dan made a really pretty bike. It has a lot of features, but there's just no way it can be what he's saying it is, because I was half the price. And the bottom line is, we're just half the price. Mm-hmm. I don't need to make 50%, 75% on these bikes, and age groupers or professionals have bought the bike, and the bike speaks for itself when they're on it.
Yeah, it does. And it speaks for itself without anybody even being on it, because, I mean, it's a beautiful looking bike too. And I know I've seen Stevens, and I've seen the ones that you've had out when you were over at Escape the Cape. And there's a local rider here, Sydney, who she's on a Premier Tactical. She's, I think, getting ready. She's going to be racing Ironman Lake Placid this weekend, I believe.
We'll have about 10 bikes at Lake Placid. We had 6 at Muncie last week. Chicago will have probably 12 bikes there. And we don't give bikes away. I mean, a lot of these companies, you'll see a lot of these people, and if they get 50,000 hits on their Facebook page, the manufacturer gives them a bike. Our bikes are inexpensive and super high quality. So when we got the first container in, they were all pre-sold. That was in May of last year. We got the second container in, and all but 3 or 4 were pre-sold. And now I've got another container coming in September, and about 70% are pre-sold. So it's one thing to have a lot of bikes at a race, but it's another thing when you have customers and athletes that purchase the bike because of the value and are at those races.
And so can you talk to me about the process? Because you're saying that most of the bikes that are coming in are already sold, but they won't be here until September. So if somebody purchases a Premier Tactical, and let's say they purchase it, right now, today, tomorrow, within the next week, when could they expect to see their bike? And is that process a little bit different for you than it would be just going into your local bike shop and purchasing a bike?
It used to be, because bike shops used to stock high-end bikes. Go into a Cervelo shop and try to buy that P5X or that P56. They're going to order it. They're not going to have it there. And, they may have one size, whatever there. But it's really tough to go in. We got a local bike shop right here. And if you want to buy the high-end bikes, they don't have them. And so, and in fact, Trek now is doing a direct-to-consumer. Almost all the big companies are now has some form of direct-to-consumer. So it's really, The difference, I guess, would be is they may have a ton of inventory, but I talk with every customer. Every customer has my cell phone number, so if they're out at the weekend and they run into a problem, they give me a call, and they do, and it's fine. Um, I don't want to sell 5,000 bikes a year and have a board of directors and have CEOs like the first medical company I was with breathing down my neck. We want to be a nice company to people that enjoy the sport, get them a really high quality bike at a reasonable price, and then continue to provide them service when they need it, and not forget about them. And so the only way you can do that is to stay relatively small and be good to people.
And so, in regards to the ordering process and the purchasing process, if somebody orders a bike through you, typically how long would it take for them to receive their bike?
So normally, like right now, I've got some smalls. So we've got probably 6 smalls right now in stock. So if you ordered a bike today, today's Thursday, you'd have it at your door probably next Wednesday or Thursday. If you pre-order, then I tell you when the vessel, I tell you, hey, it's going to be here on this day because we have a vessel that is leaving on X date. So like for the September shipment, I think the vessel's leaving August, I think the 20th. It's 17 days on the water, and then it takes me about a week to get the power meters on and get them out. So, mid-September. But then I'll have inventory on some of the sizes for a while, and then I'm sure we're going to sell out. I mean, that's just what's happened.
Yeah, so it could take, and it could be immediate, or it could be like you were saying. If you walk into a bike shop and you say you want the P5, I mean, 9 times out of 10 they're going to have to order it because, quite frankly, as you were saying, with the price point, a lot of bike shops, they can't afford to be holding that kind of inventory and sitting on bikes that are, $10,000, $12,000.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think that the bigger companies will have their central inventory in a little bit better shape than we are. So, you'll probably get it faster from them, but you're going to pay twice the price for the same bike. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a matter of convenience. Are you willing to pay, twice the price for having it a little bit faster?
Yeah, and the very first shipment we had, I had promised a date to 2 athletes, and the vessel we got backed up. So I actually flew over to Taiwan and brought 2 bikes back with me and delivered them. And we didn't make any money on them, but I had promised them because they had been training all year for an Ironman, and they needed, they're expecting their bike. So that's just the kind of stuff you have to do sometimes to live up to your promises. And so, if I have to do that, that's what I'll do.
Yeah. So talk to me just a little bit about I know you've touched on it, but the current state of Premier Tactical, and where you would like to see it go. I think through the course of our conversation here, it's quite obvious that you don't want to be in a bike shop and selling, 5,000 bikes per month. You want to stay small and do a direct to consumer. But where do you want to take Premier Tactical?
I've gone back and forth on it a few times. Originally I was talking with my wife, and she was asking me, what I wanted to do. And I said, I'd like to do about 300 bikes a year and stay a niche company and not get all wrapped around the axle and get crazy. And then the success of the bike really took off. And then I started thinking, well, maybe I should do something larger. So I'm not really sure where it's going to go. I want to get through this next 6 months or so into 2019, and I think we're going to have some really good results on the bike with some of the athletes. They're just doing really great, and see how the bike is received kind of organically out in the marketplace. And I'm also working right now on an extra small 650 version which we're going to have in September. I've been working on it for about a year and a half. So I was kind of consumed with that for people under 5'5" that have absolutely no good riding bike. They're just, if they put you on a 700C wheel bike and you're 5'5" and under, it's just not right. So we're going to bring that in. We got a new wheel line that comes in September with those bikes. Really, really nice. Some features on the wheels, and then we're doing a road bike project, which I'm about 70% done with it, but I've had to slow down on it because I was working so hard on the extra small. So there's other things that we're doing before we need to get too big or introduce too many other things.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you was, what was the biggest kind of difference or change that you made from the original Premier, the 1.0 to the Premier 2.0?
You're going to find this crazy, but it's the same bike. All we did was we changed the decaling because people, and they were right, they said our decaling was kind of not that great. And I'm like, all right, I didn't really care about the decaling that much. So we changed the decals on both the wheels. Now all the decals are black on the wheels. And then you can get blue, white, red on the bikes for decals. And then we changed the grips, a little bit nicer grip rather than bar tape, and ceramic bottom bracket rather than the standard Shimano, and a ceramic rear large pulley kit that comes with the bike now. But my philosophy on that was to try to make this bike kind of like Porsche and Corvette did, where for many years you really couldn't tell the year differences. So if somebody buys a bike this year, it looks brand new, and they can buy the parts to make it the newest generation all the time. We fixed the rear storage. The rear storage that was on it was kind of, I thought I did a good job on it, and I just didn't. So I made a new design for that, produced them, and we shipped those all out to all the customers for free because I knew that the first round of them wasn't what the quality that I wanted it to be. But that's about it. I mean, we went, the Shimano updated from 6,800 to R8000, so that's on all the bikes. Other than that, we're going to put a nicer saddle on this one, and that's about it. These bikes they were really dialed in right from the start.
And did you are you taking any feedback from people who have been riding them? So somebody who got the original, Premier 1.0, and have they kind of done any R&D and then reported back to you on some areas that they liked, didn't like, to put, places to improve aside from the rear storage?
Yeah, one of the complaints was that we didn't offer a tilt kit for the extensions. So I designed a tilt kit and we offered that to everybody. And then a couple of athletes wanted to use, we have kind of an ovalized extension tube. It's super adjustable. That's why I did them the way I did them. So you can still adjust the front end of the bike quite a lot, but they wanted to use some aftermarket round 22.2 millimeter tubes. So I designed some hardware that would work with the existing bike, that if you wanted to swap out our extensions, you can use anybody's extensions. So we made that addition. So now that's just a part they can purchase if they want to. That's about it. Everybody else has really not, they like the bike the way it is.
Yeah. And so I just have a couple questions for you, some kind of just like random, quick hitters. When you finish your race, Olympic, half iron, whatever the case may be, what is your favorite post-race meal?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I would probably have a smoothie and some pasta.
Yeah, okay. And I'm sure that's probably pretty similar to your pre-race meal too, then.
Yeah, I was going to say that's my meals are fairly generic.
That's pretty much go-to there on the pre-race meal. I think everybody, pretty much agrees. Either that or they go with pizza. I know that's a big pre-race meal as well.
Yeah, I've tried vegetarian pizza, and without cheese and some kind of pepperoni on it, it's pretty much a cracker. So I usually don't eat the pizza.
And I mean, I will say, I went to a place out near me in Lancaster called The Fridge, and they specialize in kind of like a very flat, crispy, like square style pizza. And so my friend that I met there, he's vegan, so he got vegan pizza. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, this goes against, I mean, I come from an Italian family. Like, this goes against everything I know. I can't, like do this. So I tried a little piece of the vegan pizza. And honestly, like, the vegetarian and vegan kind of, scene has come so far that it really didn't taste any different. I mean, it tasted almost exactly like just a regular cheese pizza.
Yeah, yeah. I think that would be sacrilege, though. My wife's Italian. If I if I tried to eat a vegan pizza, I don't know if I'd get over that one.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no. I mean, believe me, I would not be eating a vegan pizza in front of my Italian grandmother or anything, but I figured I would at least give it a shot so that I could say I tried it. And so the last question that I have for you is, you know, this, and we talked about this when I had talked to you on the phone, kind of before the podcast, and so I explained to you, everything that I'm going for here on the Do It For Yourself podcast, and kind of what Do It For Yourself means. And so the question that I have for you is, thinking back to that Dan who just got his bonus check, for $30,000, and he was thinking about launching into this company. What would you say to somebody who is in that same position but is leaning more towards the safe route?
I think you have to have the personality to do what you do best. Um, as I said before, my wife was an attorney, and I had asked her to leave the firm she was with and start her own firm, get a couple of colleagues together. We'd get a building, the practice would end up paying off the building, and, she could have her own business. And it just wasn't her. She didn't want to do it. And I said I'd take care of, a lot of the book work and take care of all the technical stuff with getting the building done and all that. And it just wasn't right for her. So being an entrepreneur and risking, it's a hard road. And so it's just not right for everybody. So if you have a yearning to be your own boss, and you think through it and you have a good idea, don't be afraid to do it if that's what your personality allows. And just don't give up. Every problem is a solution. And if there's a lot of problems and it's difficult, that means the barriers to entry are hard, and that just means you don't get a lot of startup competition. So work hard and work your plan, and I think you'll be successful.
Great. Well, Dan, I just want to say again, thank you so much for jumping on here with me this evening, and sharing so much of your story, and kind of how you went from this medical industry and now jumped into the cycling industry, and you're really putting your passion into this company, and you want to see it succeed. But you also want to take care of these people who are supporting you in this. So I think that's something that's very admirable. And again, just thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Ian, it's been a real pleasure, and I wish you success also with your podcast and with your life and your business.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. And I will talk with you again soon. Hopefully, I will get a chance to see you, maybe not this year, but next year at Escape the Cape.
That'd be terrific.
Great. Well, thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wham, bam. Thank you, ma'am, or sir, or however it is that you would like to be referred to. Some people don't like ma'am. That's the only thing. It makes them feel old, and other people don't like sir. So whatever. Anyway, that was my interview with Dan Kennison. Please let me know what you thought. I would really appreciate that. I would just like to say thank you again to Dan for jumping on the show with me. I really appreciate that as well. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this episode. As always, you can reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, anywhere you can find me under Do It For Yourself, and I would love to hear from you. So until next week, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you then.